Welcome back to Square Off. Whoever wins the governor's office in 2026 could inherit a huge financial headache. A new forecast by the state's independent budget analysts warns that Arizona's expenses could balloon in coming years with not enough money to cover those expenses. The state could be more than $1 billion short. The culprits are one-time projects from the current year's budget and more than $1 billion to conform to President Trump's budget bill. So, is the state heading off a fiscal cliff during the election year? And how will this play out in the governor's race? Our politics panel steps in now. Lorna Romero-Ferguson, Republican consultant at Elevate Strategies, and Democratic consultant John Laredo. Welcome back to Square Off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Want to give viewers a timestamp. The No Kings rally is happening after our taping, so we will not be talking about what happened there because it has not happened yet. Got that kind of confusing time travel. You've both worked in the inner sanctums of state government. Lorna as the top advisor to Governor Jan Brewer. John, you were Democratic House leader. What is your top takeaway from this budget forecast?
They're estimating about $1.8 billion deficit heading into the 2028 fiscal year, which means they've got to do that budget next year. And when you've got a budget deficit that big, you've got to make some really critical choices in how you balance that budget, because we're a balanced budget state. They have to do it. So those are really difficult decisions that I'm not sure people are ready to make.
Okay. Lorna, your top takeaway?
Yeah, there's a number of different variables, right? I mean, this week when we had some of the top economists of the state kind of forecast what's coming up for the next fiscal year, there's a number of unknowns. What's going to be the impact of the current federal government shutdown, right? How long is that going to last? Will there be residual impact? Will the state determine, do they actually want to conform to all of the changes in H.R. 1, all the tax changes, which typically are pretty, favorable amongst voters going into an election year, but those are costly. And then also with a number of the federal government changes that did happen in H.R. 1, that's pushing a lot of costs to the state as well. And then you have a kind of weakened economy, consumer sentiment is kind of down. So there's a number of different variables of what that ending number is going to be, and it's going to require bipartisan negotiation at the legislature during an election year where people are going to want to point fingers the entire time.
We'll get to the pointing fingers part in a second. I want to point out, what about Medicaid? There are Medicaid cuts the state's going to have to deal with.
There are significant ones, and those are phased in over time, but we're going to be dealing with one repercussion right now when we're talking about enhanced premium tax credits and what's going to be the impact to consumers in Arizona, and will that increase the number of uninsured? And then in current and future fiscal years, there are going to be significant cuts to Medicaid in the state that we have to determine, are we going to eat that cost because the feds aren't paying anymore? Are we going to increase taxes? Are we going to cut, eligibility? So there are significant public policy decisions on the healthcare side that are still coming that aren't even necessarily being discussed in the context of this upcoming budget.
Okay, now the finger pointing. Typically, incumbents own the economy. Is this a huge obstacle for Governor Katie Hobbs as she seeks a second term?
Well, the state budget is balanced right now because there was a negotiation between Governor Hobbs, the Democrats in the House and Senate, and the Republicans in the House and Senate. They came together, they passed a bipartisan budget that's balanced, and it was a good one. The deficit that they're going into is largely caused by what they're doing in Washington, D.C. Those cuts that come down to the states, not only Arizona, but every state, are going to be devastating. And so when you have the premium tax credits that are going to impact the Affordable Care Act, you've got people that are going to be dropping off. Those people may think they're going to maybe get on access or something. They're not going to be able to, because those cuts are going to go deep, and you've got a 4-to-1 match, state money to federal money, and when that happens, we're not going to be able to close that hole.
So it sounds like you're saying the governor can point her fingers at Washington.
Well, the governor is left with the responsibility of balancing the budget along with every other legislator in both parties. And now they've got this delivered to them by Washington, D.C. And I'll tell you one more thing. The person who voted for it is Andy Biggs, and he's got to answer for that next year.
Governor Hobbs could definitely point the finger at D.C., which she and Democrats have been pointing at since the debate about H.R. 1 and the impacts that were going to be shifted to the state. So I highly anticipate her campaign is going to focus on that. Republicans at the legislature are going to point and say these are failures on part of the governor, and they've already been talking about how the economy in Arizona is waning and the lack of job growth under her leadership. People are just going to be pointing at different figures that can actually help their narrative. But when it comes down to negotiating a budget, it's going to have to be a bipartisan act down there with split government. So they're going to have to sit in a room and figure out get on the same page. Okay, what is the revenue that we're anticipating, and then what are our priorities? And Governor Hobbs and Republicans who vote for that budget are going to own it going into this election cycle, because it does have to be a bipartisan vote. So it'll be interesting to see what those priorities are and who actually comes to the table and leads on either side to try to negotiate that.
Okay, we're going to move on now. Next up, the fallout from a Politico report on a chat room for the Young Republican organization that was filled with racist, misogynist conversations, largely among young men. The chair of the Arizona Young Republicans, Luke Mosselman, was fired from his job at the Center for Arizona Policy. That's according to the Arizona Agenda, CAP, a very conservative organization. Another Arizona Young Republican leader, Rachel Hope, worked on Congressman Juan Ciscomani's campaign. That, according to the Green Valley News, Ciscomani's office has not commented. Vice President J.D. Vance downplayed the talk of gas chambers, slavery, and rape in that chat group as, quote, kids doing stupid things, especially young boys. Participants were largely men. I find this kind of breathtaking, just what we see there. What does the reaction to the Young Republicans chat tell us about the political discourse going forward, or just where we are right now?
It's sad, in my opinion, that when it comes to any issue, whether it's a Republican, Democrat group, whoever it is that says something inappropriate, that there's a hesitancy to call it out. Words matter, behavior matters, and to downplay something, I think, is unfortunate. Luckily, there were a number of Republican groups that came out pretty quickly across the nation, even the AZ GOP, condemning that behavior. These were not children. This was not a 12-year-old kid in a group chat or chatting online with a group of friends that needs to be disciplined by their parents. These are adults, and we need to have higher expectations from people on both sides of the aisle.
John, whatever happened to parties taking ownership of their own? Because you see the Democratic side, there's this Jay Jones controversy, candidate in Virginia. Should there be more of that? Is that the problem here, or is it something else?
Sure, because it's a very dangerous thing to see, right? Because these are people that are involved in politics, and they're the younger generation. When their priorities, it seems, are filled with just hate towards other people, that's not leadership. That's dangerous. And for us, you know, we were talking about this earlier, but it's our responsibility to sit down in a room, Democrats and Republicans, and we're supposed to be able to work together and solve problems that everyday Americans face and everyday Arizonans face, like health care and better jobs and education. All of those important things need to be solved. You can't get to solving those issues when you're busy talking about racist issues and homophobia and sexist things. That's not what anybody needs, and we don't need that in our politics right now to make things even worse.
Yeah,
and we don't need it we just don't need it in our common discourse in general. Even if these weren't a group of young Republican conservatives, part of an organization, it's inappropriate comments in general, and I just fear that as a society we're becoming so desensitized as to what's inappropriate and what's not, what people should be held accountable for.
All right, last topic. Kristi Noem, Homeland Security Secretary, her 30-second video messages blaming Democrats for the shutdown are not being shown in airports around the country, including Sky Harbor. They say we can't do this. Will airports face retribution, do you think, from the Trump administration for rejecting those videos?
Well, I don't know if they will or not, but the reality is it was a political ad, and those political ads have no place in our airports.
There's also the Hatch Act.
Well, there's the Hatch Act, but there's also policy that airports follow. And in Phoenix, the only things at play are it has to deal with airport operations, an advertisement for a concession, or it has to promote tourism. And if it's not in those three categories, it doesn't play. And this was a political ad, and so it was ruled out.
So it's a pretty easy call. Will they face retribution, you think?
I mean, that's always a risk when you do something against the Trump administration, right? Or any administration in D.C. There's always, we haven't seen anything yet. If the ad just did not blame Democrats, it was just explaining potential delays because of the federal government shutdown and apologizing, I think everything would be fine. But this just, again, just goes to the broader context of what we're dealing with when it comes to national politics.
All right, got to end it there. Lorna Romero-Ferguson, John Laredo, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's our show for this week. Thanks very much to all of our guests. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you back here next weekend for another round of Sunday Square Off.
Continue with us on 12 Plus. Download on your TV and watch for free.